are moving right along, and I'm so excited to bring up this next speaker. She has a passion for being a nurse, taking care of patients, and watching them progress into healing. Here to talk to us about COVID-19, a frontline worker's experience as a nurse. Welcome, Renee Foree.
I'm Regan, and I've been an intensive care nurse my whole entire career of 20 years. I'm going to tell you what it was like a little bit for me. I worked at Deaconess/Integris during this time. And it was May of 2020, and Deaconess closed down because we had a lack of patients, because surgeries had all stopped and everybody was staying home. So they moved us across the street to the Northwest Expressway campus. But by July 2020, we got to come back home to Deaconess. But it was the all-COVID hospital. So on the actual day that we moved back home, I was the charge nurse, and I was photographed by the media, somewhere around here, moving our equipment back in. So we were preparing to start receiving COVID patients. We had a 7-bed makeshift ICU in the ER. When that filled up, we moved to the 13-bed third-floor ICU. And then that filled up, we moved to another location. We opened another 10-bed unit in the ER. So in total, 28 beds in 3 separate locations. Our first PPE, the personal protective equipment we wore, were gown and gloves, and then a hood with its own airflow system, as seen. But those took too long to put on, and then we were yelling at each other and our patients. So we either got a half-mask respirator or a full-mask respirator, and so to go in a room, you'd have to put on a pair of gloves, put your gown on, put another pair of gloves on, put your half-mask respirator and your eye protection on. Sometimes these gowns were made of plastic. It was like wearing a garbage bag. I was hot. I almost passed out a couple of times just from the heat of being in a room for hours on end, masked up. It was a war zone. People were coming into the ER and having to say goodbye to their person at the door. Having to witness people dying alone was the single most soul-crushing aspect for us nurses. People were dying left and right. When we admitted a patient that was talking, we knew it wouldn't be long. We learned the progression of the disease. Patients would start on a high-flow nasal cannula. We would max them out on that support, and then we would move to a BiPAP. BiPAPs are not comfortable. It pushes air into your face. Your mouth dries out. You can't eat or drink. We would have to sedate these patients just to keep them from tearing their mask off. Intubation or life support was saved for the very last because patients usually died. Once we intubated them, we paralyzed, we sedated them, and then we proned them, meaning we flipped them on their stomachs. It took a staff or a team of 5 to 6 nurses, plus a respiratory therapist. The physicality of being a COVID ICU nurse was brutal, and my body is just now recovering, both mentally and physically, after being done for 6 months. The toll it took on the medical community is very real. We all have our own personal stories. We all have some form of PTSD. My mom said I would come home with no smiles. I was like a walking zombie. I would come home and share stories with her, and then I would just cry. I became a nurse to help people, to save lives, and to make a difference. We had no control. We were learning the disease progression as it happened and adjusting our practice accordingly. Day after day for a year and a half, we had very few wins. But when we did have a patient move out of the unit, we would cheer them on as they wheeled out. Morale was very low. We were mentally, physically, and emotionally drained. Core staff were dropping like flies to go be a travel nurse. As the money was great, and for the first time, nurses were being paid what they were worth for putting their lives on the front line every day. Most of us nurses got COVID. I got COVID at the beginning in March of 2020, before there was testing. And on my birthday, the world closed down. We had new grad nurses, baby green nurses that came out into a world of COVID. They didn't know what regular nursing was like until COVID had simmered down. We had to rush their training because we had so many patients that were in kidney failure on bedside dialysis that we had to get them trained. COVID, excuse me, I once had a family member of a patient on the phone tell me, COVID's not real. You guys did this to her. And I, at this point, have had enough of the idiocracy out there. And my reply was, well, I'm not going to tolerate your verbal abuse. Do not call this ICU again, and hung up. That is the single most disrespectful comment to a medical professional. COVID is real. It did not discriminate. Thank you.
I think all of our frontline workers deserve a round of applause.